2006, I believe you indicated that you had started your testing of the items.
That's correct.
Okay. And can you tell me what you received to compare or to start your testing?
Sure. The first items I received in this case were buccal standards from Mr. Carter and Mr. Duncan. And when I say a buccal standard, I mean that's the swab that we take from the interior of the mouth to get skin cells or cheek cells that will contain the DNA, and we can use that as a reference point. The buccal standard just simply is a known reference from the individual that we can use to compare back to the evidentiary samples.
Okay. And I always want to call them buccal swabs, but, so you received buccal swabs from Mr. Carter and Mr. Duncan?
That's correct.
Had you later received buccal swabs from Mr. Black?
I later received a blood standard from Mr. Black.
Okay, so a blood standard. And did you have did you then test those swabs or those standards against the anal and vaginal swabs of Candy Belt?
All the standards were tested to obtain their profile, and then they were compared to the previous testing done on the vaginal swabs and anal swabs.
And what was the content of, or what was the result of that testing?
Sure. From my report number 1, the male DNA profile from the vaginal swabs and the anal swabs does not match Mr. Carter or Mr. Duncan.
Okay. And if I show you a report, I think what you're looking at is a 3-page report.
My report 1 is a 1-page. Yes, this is my report number 4.
Okay. So you have, how many different reports did you do in this case?
I have 6 different reports on this case.
Okay. So what I just handed you, you indicated was report number 4?
Yes, that's correct.
And that is, what were the items? It looks like there were a significant amount of items that were tested. Can you just briefly run through those?
Sure. On my report number 4, we received several of the items that had been previously tested at the laboratory. Well, not at our laboratory. We sent at the time the original DNA testing was done on this case. We were using a contract laboratory. The Kentucky State Police was not doing DNA in-house at that point, at least not the type of analysis that we're currently doing. So for this report, I received a lot of those items back at the laboratory so we could redo the testing and get more information out of it. A lot of the original testing was done in one amplification kit. And as I said earlier, we're amplifying the DNA to get enough that we can actually make comparisons to. The original kit that some of this DNA was done in only tested at 8 locations, the 8 locations that we're looking at throughout the DNA. And then some of the additional things that were done later, still before I had done them, were only tested at 9 locations. So we brought all the evidence back in, and I was able to test those and get 13 locations that we were looking at. And the reason that we're adding more locations that we're doing the testing, those 8 and 9 locations are still involved in that 13 that I've done. I've just done more, and the reason that we want more, the more information we have, the better we can evaluate the evidence. So where a conclusion may be one thing at 5, 6, 7, 8 locations, it may be a little different as we get more information, because some of the locations that you may have been looking at earlier may have been more similar. They weren't as discriminating. You couldn't discriminate between one individual and another individual because some of their DNA may have been the same at those locations. But as we add more locations to that, we're able to say with higher certainty whether an individual is included or excluded at that place. So for report number 4, we had the anal swabs from Miss Belt, the vaginal swabs from Miss Belt, the oral swabs from Miss Belt, several cuttings from a camouflage fabric, the blood standard from Ms. Ross, a vaginal slide from Ms. Belt, an anal slide from Ms. Belt, an oral slide from Ms. Belt, excuse me, an anal smear from Ms. Belt, a vaginal smear from Ms. Belt, an oral smear from Ms. Belt, a head hair standard from Ms. Belt, a pubic hair standard from Ms. Belt, pubic hair combings from Ms. Belt, and again, more cuttings from a camouflage fabric.
And you personally tested those, and you came up with this report, and your conclusions then are on, or the results of the examination are on pages 2 and 3 of that report?
Yes, I did not test all of those items, but the items that I did test, the results are on 2 and 3.
And again, so that is a fair and accurate representation of the report you made, report number 4?
It does appear to be, yes.
Then I would ask that this be marked and introduced in evidence.
Without objection, to be marked as Defendant Carter Exhibit Number 26 and received in evidence.
And again, your conclusions were that this DNA sample that was located from Candy Belt did not come from Ed Carter.
When the reanalysis was done, the male DNA profile that was obtained from the vaginal swabs from Ms. Belt did not match Mr. Carter, Mr. Duncan, or Mr. Black.